I live in a student house. Our landlord was recently arrested. I don't even know where to begin. These past few weeks have been a blizzard of court appearances, my parents dragging me back home, and borderline harassment from the media. I live in England and am just finishing my second year of university, although I doubt I'll be allowed to return for a third year now. I moved into this house last summer. There were 7 of us, to begin with, myself, my friends, Chris and Will, and then 4 acquaintances, Lily, Molly, Jesse and Carmen. The house was nothing special. Like most student houses, it had seen much better days and there was an overpowering smell of weed blanketing the house. We weren't that fussed. It was only for a year and we all got on pretty well from the off. It was helped by the fact I had a huge crush on Molly, despite the unspoken rule of not sleeping with your housemates. A guy can dream, right? Like I said, everything was going great. I was doing enough to get by in uni and was working towards a substantial grade. My social life was great. We would go on a night out at least 3 times a week and I worked part-time at the local cafe to fund my time drinking. Basically your average student. The first sign of what was to come happened just after Christmas. A girl a few streets over vanished. Ellie was her name. We all knew her, not very well, but we'd seen her around at house parties. Of course this isn't too uncommon with students. Sometimes people just go on mad drug binges and will just show up days later, and Ellie was definitely one of those students. Of course she did turn up eventually, but she turned up floating upside down in the local river, her throat cut to the bone. Of course, this was a huge shock to just about everyone I know. I'm sure if you ever were or have ever met a student you'll know that the vast majority of us basically think of ourselves as invincible, so this was a massive shock. It was all anyone would talk about for about a week, until the next disappearance. Cassie, again I didn't know her that well but some of the girls I lived with did, and they were devastated. No one knew where she was, but so soon after Ellie's body turning up, everyone was worried. It turns out people were right to be worried. Cassie was found a few days later. Her naked body was lying in a patch of trees in the park, but her head was never found. If Ellie hadn't put the student body on edge already, then Cassie's brutal murder definitely had. Students, especially girls, were rarely seen going out in groups of less than 4. It was impressive, I suppose, how much such a large group of different people banded together and how prepared we were to look out for each other. I'd love to say that Cassie was the last one, but no, every few weeks another girl would go missing, and inevitably their body would turn up a few days later, sometimes unrecognizable at first glance. One of the girls, I think her name was Jasmine, didn't even vanish. She went out late to the 24-hour shop just round the corner to stock up on drinks. After about half an hour her friend grew concerned and went out to see if everything was okay. She found her with her still warm organs spilled from the gaping wound on her stomach, the blood mixing with the smashed vodka bottle on the ground next to her. That happened 2 streets over. One of the hardest things for me was Molly's reaction. You see, these girls all had one key similarity: long, wavy blonde hair, just like Molly's. We had been growing progressively closer since moving in together and I was really starting to develop feelings for her. However, Molly suffered from paranoia and her similarity to the killer's victims resulted in multiple breakdowns, and I made sure I was there to comfort her every time. I guess I did a good job because as the year progressed the frequency of these breakdowns decreased, despite the killings continuing. I know you're probably wondering how the sick bee hadn't been caught, but unfortunately the police force around here isn't known for its effectiveness. That, and I noticed that in various media articles the killer was described as being very intelligent and always one step ahead of the law, which of course was very reassuring to the local residents, especially since the murders were getting worse. I remember one particularly gruesome time when 2 girls were found by their housemates, still sat on the sofa in front of the TV where they'd been the night before. Only the sliding door had been smashed and the girls no longer had eyes or hearts. That one was really bad. It was March when things got really bad. Things had been going great with Molly and myself, despite the murderous psychopath on the loose. It was the 25th when it happened. All our housemates were back home and it was just the 2 of us. We were sat on the sofa watching Family Guy, taking it in turns hitting the bong, and we were pretty stoned. We were just chatting away, but one thing led to another. I kissed her, and she kissed me back. We carried on for about 5 minutes before she pulled away and told me that we can't. It was a mistake and we were just high. I confessed my feelings for her right then and there. Looking back it was stupid, but like I said, I was off my head at the time. She rejected me, and it killed me. I didn't say anything, but I grabbed my coat and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me. She was getting upset and tried to stop me, but no way, I was staying there. I went round to my mate's house a few doors down and just crashed on his sofa for the night, furious with myself for ruining things with her. I returned the next day, when I knew she'd be in a lecture. I already had a plan. I was gonna shower, get changed, then I was going out with some friends for a pub crawl. After all, what's better to get over pain than a stupid amount of alcohol? When I got back though I noticed something wrong with the door. The lock was broken, beyond use. Damn it, I thought must have destroyed it when I slammed the door. I got even angrier, as well as the cold rejection the day before. I would now have to pay the landlord to fix the bloody thing. I sent him a message straight away asking what's the soonest he could get it replaced, as well as letting my housemates know in our group chat, which understandably led to some very angry reactions. The landlord was surprisingly relaxed about getting it fixed, saying it would take him a few days to come and look at it, even though he lived about 10 minutes away and spent most of his life doing nothing but collecting and spending our rent money. I even pointed out how unsafe it was, especially with all the killings, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Still, I stuck to my original plan because I definitely didn't want to be around when Molly got home, so I slung on a nice outfit, grabbed my stuff and headed out to meet the boys. I didn't get home until about 3 a.m. I was very drunk at this point and I had come up with the fantastic idea of trying to talk to Molly again, fueled by the 20-odd pints sloshing around in my stomach. I pushed open the still broken door and headed upstairs. The next few hours were a blur, from the 999 call, to the multiple sirens outside, to Molly's body being carried out under a sheet. Of course I was questioned intensively. After all my housemates were away, so I was a prime suspect. I told the police I'd been out with my mates all night, and when I came back I went up to talk to her, and found her lying glassy-eyed in bed, our kitchen knife still embedded in what was left of her throat. I was in pieces. I really had loved her, I think, and the last time we spoke I had stormed out of the house, leaving her with tears in her eyes. Of course all my friends tried to console me. They knew what had happened between us and how much I had cared for her, but I brushed them aside. We were all furious at our landlord. Maybe if he'd fixed our lock then the girl I loved would still be breathing. But we couldn't do anything. Technically he hadn't broken any laws after all. We all wanted to move out, but our contract contracts locked us in for the rest of the year, and being broke students there was no way we could do anything about it. The atmosphere at our house was very different after. All of my housemates especially seemed to show me so much pity, which honestly pissed me off a bit. I didn't deserve their pity. I was alive. We did try to get past it though. We tried to get along and spend the same amount of time together. Honestly, I enjoyed it. I liked being out of the house. It reminded me of her, and besides, I wasn't sleeping well. I'd always had a problem with my room, weird noises in the night and the like. I'd always tell myself it was just the sounds of some crappy old student house, but since Molly, the noises just kept me awake all night. The only way around them were strong sleeping pills, which always made me feel groggy and bad-tempered. Anyway, life moves on. We carried on living our lives. I carried on with my course. I missed Molly every day, but I knew I had to keep working if I wanted my dream job. The killings continued, of course. By now the killer had over 20 known victims to their name and the police were stunned. The media had stopped covering the killings in such detail as the general public inevitably grew less interested, and the accusations of all the victims being druggy subtly increased. Then last week, the story exploded across the papers again. It was on Monday night. I'd just popped a lot of sleeping pills and was already feeling drowsy. Before I got into bed, however, I made sure I put all my washing away neatly folded and ironed. I suffer from minor OCD, so this helped me sleep a little better. I was just hanging up my last shirt when the wardrobe rail collapsed, not for the first time, and certainly not the last, I muttered to myself. As I learned to pick it up though, I stopped, something having caught my eye. The wall was uneven. Normally I wouldn't have noticed this, but the angle of the lighting in my room that night really highlighted it. I leaned forwards and felt around it, unknowingly applying a small amount of force to it. The last thing I expected was part of the wall to creak open. It's a door, I realized. By now my brain was becoming very muddled because of the pills, but I knew deep down how significant it was. I pushed the door open and glanced inside. It was a tiny little area, but there was no mistaking the crumpled up sleeping bag on the floor, or the stupid scarf my landlord wore every time the temperature dropped below 20 degrees. It took a few seconds for my drug-addled brain to register what I was seeing, but when I did I gasped and pulled back sharply, my head hitting the wall, hard. I saw stars as I backed away from my wardrobe. I remember slamming that creepy little door shut before I collapsed onto my bed in agony. Luckily there was no one in there, but I still had to do something like tell the police or at least my housemates. That was my last thought before the pills overtook me and I drifted into unconsciousness. I didn't remember anything the day after. Like I said, those sleeping pills are strong. My brain was completely fried and I barely remembered taking my washing out of the machine, let alone any of the events that followed. I remember 2 days later when we found Carmen's body. It was on Wednesday. When they found the body, she was stone cold, lying in her bloody room without her head or any other limbs. We were all taken in to be interviewed, of course, but we're all cleared. Obviously, being my second time there, I was looked upon with much more suspicion, but after seeing my train tickets to the Lake District and back, that confirmed I'd left 3 days before her death and returned 2 days after I was cleared as well. It was that night that I remembered the door in my wardrobe. I don't know exactly what led my thought process back to it, but suddenly I just clicked. I half ran over to that spot and sure enough there was the door. I listened to make sure there was no one inside. Unfortunately, all my remaining housemates had been immediately forced to come home by their parents, but mine weren't due to pick me up until tomorrow. Gingerly I pushed the door open to confirm I hadn't been hallucinating or anything the first time. The police cars arrived an hour later, the reporters 20 minutes after them. The evidence against my landlord was overwhelming. There were peepholes looking into every room. The sick bastard had been spying on us through the walls. They also found hundreds of photos of the victims, pictures of them at the park or shops, unaware of their stalker, pictures of them tied up with signs of gruesome torture, pictures of their mutilated corpses, combined with a collection of underwear confirmed to belong to some of the different victims, and the cherry on top, bloody knives and instruments that match multiple injuries across the trail of bodies. He pled guilty yesterday. Up until then he'd confessed to being a peeping Tom, a sick pervert, but he'd denied the murders. The evidence was too convincing though. He ended up taking the first plea deal he was offered, trying to spare his wife and children a long trial, I suppose. I've been back home for a week now. My parents are acting overprotective as ever right now, unsurprisingly I suppose. The media buzz has calmed a little, the murder stopping with his arrest solidifying public opinion. I still miss Molly every day. I loved her and think I always will. That's where I'll leave it. Cindy just finished her shift at the bar. Maybe I'll use my hands this time so it's harder to make the link. After all, no one has any idea I planted all that evidence in the walls.